Hey guys, welcome to JReviews. I am Iceman, and for today's episode I'll be covering the mainline Command & Conquer series from its initial beginnings up to where it is today. Note that I will not be covering the Red Alert games, as I will be saving those for a later additional review. The Command & Conquer series is a real-time strategy series of games that began itself as an evolution of the gameplay established in Dune 2 back in 1992, of resource collection, building up of a base and army, then going out and taking out your opponent, that so many other series of games would follow, such as Warcraft, Starcraft, Dark Reign, and so many more. The franchise has been a massive love of mine ever since I was a kid, and a series I go back to time and time again, and will likely continue to do so. So let's get into it. Command & Conquer was the first game in the series and was released on the 26th of September 1995, and was developed by Westwood Studios. The game was an immediate and massive success with sales of over $3 million, and quickly became a game of choice for many players at LAN parties for its multiplayer. The game is set somewhere between 2017 and 2020, with the first of several world wars fought between the Global Defense Initiative, or GDI, and the Brotherhood of Nod. GDI take the form of a United Nations-led security force, whereas Nod were a cult-like militant organization led by the charismatic leader Kane. The game kicks off with the world's first exposure to the alien substance called Tiberium, with a meteor crashing near the river Tiber in Italy in 1995, which over time becomes a source of enriched minerals, fought over by the two forces. By the point in time where the game itself takes place, Tiberium has now reached most of the continents of the world, and Nod seeks world domination. Narrative to the game is told through full motion video or FMV videos. These were all top-notch stuff, though intentionally cheesy as hell. The videos all were well done, with numerous videos of interest, like the starting sequence showing fictional TV shows going on, the videos detailing Tiberium and its spreading, as well as details on GDI and Nod in general. I absolutely adore the FM videos in this game. This is FMV done well, which was very often not the case with videos of that time period. In addition, further story is conveyed via text briefings included at the start of each mission, which detail precisely what objectives are required for completion. The feel of this game at the point in time when Command & Conquer was truly unique, with very few points of comparison. The only real other game at that point for comparison would be Dune 2, which Westwood Studios also was the developer of, with a very similar overall gameplay flow of building up of a base, collection of resources, building up an attack force, and taking out your opponent. Graphics for the game clearly have aged when viewed with modern eyes, but a remastered edition of the game was released by Petroglyph Games on June 5th, 2020, and significantly improves the visuals of the game and the FMV videos. The remastered edition is the way to go with this game. With that factored in, the graphics are very good and stand up really well. Music for the game is fantastic stuff, worthy of listening to outside of the game. It sets a thumping feel that sets a feeling of going out and annihilating your opponents. Very warlike music. I absolutely adore the music of this game. Totally top-notch stuff. If you've never listened to the music from the game, then you need to stop what you're doing and go and listen to it right now. It is amazing stuff. Frank Klepecki, who did the music for it, did a fantastic job. Onto gameplay. I've already covered most of what Command & Conquer is about, but beyond those aspects, many of the units work in a very rock-paper-scissors type way with what they are good and bad against. For example, the machine gun troops are good against other troop types but suck against vehicles, or how rocket launcher troops are good versus vehicles but not against other troop types. There are simply too many combinations for how the troops work to be able to go into all of them, but that is just a general example. Beyond the troops, the Command & Conquer games all work via a control panel on the side of the screen, through which all building and army creations take place. Click what you want to build, wait for it to finish, and then in the case of buildings you can place it where you like, and in the case of troops they will appear near the building common to them. As mentioned earlier, Resource collection takes place via harvesters, which go forth and collect Tiberium. They are completely defenseless units and so need to be protected at all times. A unique feature with the Command & Conquer games is being able to capture buildings. This is done via engineer units who, once they make contact with an enemy building, transfer that to your control, which can be a good way of gaining access to enemy units during that particular mission. Use of special abilities is another gameplay feature, with the use of airstrikes, satellite strikes, and other special attacks becoming available for both factions in their campaigns. Speaking of campaigns, both offer quite lengthy amounts of missions, with the GDI campaign 15 missions long and Nod with 13. Of the two, the GDI campaign is the easier of the two, and Nod's campaign definitely being the harder one. Both differ majorly in the types of missions, though both have specific ones where you control either a single special forces operative or with a predefined amount of troops, and only them to complete the set objectives. Beyond that, the missions are generally to go forth and destroy your opponent's base or bases. The overall difficulty of the game as a whole is quite good, with a decent curve, though some missions are harder than others. Which, speaking of, you often have the choice of several different missions to take on. Some of these are significantly harder than others, so just know that going in when you have the multiple choices available to you. Multiplayer-wise, that factored heavily into Command & Conquer's success, as this was offered on release of the game and was damn fine fun, that was only available via LAN and direct modem connections initially. Bugs-wise, the main issue that I recall was with the DOS version of the game, where it would sometimes crash due to memory allocation issues. But this is a thing of the past in the remastered edition, with none of that at all occurring ever in my most recent playthrough. DLC and expansions wise, there was one expansion released for Command & Conquer entitled Covert Operations, which added an extra 15 missions and a secret additional campaign where you took on dinosaurs, which was quite fun. The other big expansion to mention, if you can even call it that, is Red Alert, an alternate history timeline spin-off franchise from the mainline Command & Conquer series, which goes with the question of what if one were to go back in time and kill Adolf Hitler? How would the world have turned out? And get to see where that goes. I will save proper discussion of the Red Alert games for another video, but all I'll say is that these are really damn fine good games. In particular the second game, but we will save conversation on that game for another day. And that's about it for the first game in the Command & Conquer series. On to the second one. Command & Conquer 2 Tiberium Sun was that second game in the series and was released in 1999. Changes with this entry was a much more futuristic setting, which in some respects mirrors that of the Dune games, of which Westwood had been developing Dune 2000, which I covered in episode 19, so check that out if you're interested in that. It also featured semi-3D graphics. The game received a mixed reception from fans due to its more darker setting and slower gameplay. It did still sell quite well, with sales of 1.5 million due to the massive demand for it at the time, after how excellent the first game was. The story to the game takes place in 2030, with war starting up again between the Global Defense Initiative and the forces of Nod. Tiberium, which had been starting to take root in the first game, by 2030 now has become a serious problem, with many areas of the world no longer being habitable for human life. GDI's focus in this time period is of finding ways to eliminate, or combat, or even better, eliminate it from the world entirely. Nod, in comparison, as always, seeks to use its material wealth to fuel their war machine. GDI this time round has a far more futuristic look, with mechs and futuristic weapons at their disposal. Nod, on the other hand, has gone far more cybernetic, with cyborgs and robotic forces now as part of their arsenal. There is also now a third faction, known as the Forgotten, who are composed of humans mutated from Tiberium, who also fight against Nod. This faction to me definitely took some cues from the Fremen faction in Dune 2000, some definite similarities there to be sure. The general flow to the game is quite similar to the first, with all of the basic elements still being there, but there are some differences. For example, Nod can now borrow some units underground to then pop up elsewhere to get around defences, the view has been switched to a isometric viewpoint, and there is now day and night cycles. You do now have also more artillery style of units at your disposal that can really change things up. On the graphics side, this game got a definite bump up in this department with improved resolutions and better lighting. Definitely a visual upgrade from the original, though obviously comparing to the remastered edition of the first game, it is not on that level at all, but a definite improvement over the originals. The B-grade full-motion video segments return with Tiberium Sun, with a change to a more star-studded cast, with known stars Michael Biehn and James Earl Jones joining the cast, as well as several others. Joe Kukan returned again as Kane, and was as charismatic as always. Good acting all round by the cast in this one, though it is definitely still B-grade stuff, and often has that appearance of being filmed on a set. Just as with the first game, the FMVs for Nod in particular were really good stuff. Good acting and some good scenes to be found there. Music-wise, Frank Klepecki returned again to do most of the music alongside newcomer Jared Mendelsohn. Just as with the first game, this was an area of excellence, with it setting that mood of going out and taking out your opponent. It again has that kind of warlike feel to it that was present in the first one. Gameplay-wise, as mentioned earlier, the general flow to the game is exactly the same as the first game, with the basics of resource collection, base building, building up a force and taking out your opponent all being there unchanged. But now, you have the day and night cycles, which can change how you play, as well as terrain height levels, which can affect where you can place buildings. This can be particularly tricky as several of the units cause changes to said height levels, which can really muck with things, especially if you do the artillery style attacks that when it hits the ground will cause changes to the ground. The more slower nature of the missions affects things too, though in comparing general mission times with the first, I personally did not see much of a difference there. Most still takes anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour or so to get through. Veterancy levels is another big change that comes with this game, with units gaining experience as they battle, with 3 levels that they can go and improve up to, with the standard being what you would expect with a unit fresh from the production line, up to level 3 where they hold out much better, gaining improved damage and health regen, which in the levels with no base building at all adds an extra dimension to things where you need to consider getting specific units into combat to get them better leveled up versus them getting killed. So you have that gamble, but if you can get them leveled up to level 3, you have that added benefit of the health regen, improved damage and all that kind of stuff. Unlike the first game, air and sea units do not play a major factor, especially on the sea factor. So it's primarily land-based units the majority of the way with this one. You can now destroy bridges by attacking them, which can be used to limit where your opponent can get to you from. However, they can be repaired with engineers, so the effects of that can often be temporary. You can also send in infantry to occupy buildings, which can help in fortifying areas and create choke points against enemy forces. Tiberium now comes in several forms, with green being the same as in the first game, with it offering the standard amount of resources in return and being harmful to living infantry. Blue being the first of the new types, with it offering a higher amount of resources, but being susceptible to attacks where on being hit, it may explode. There is also a new, more weed-like type, which can only be harvested via specialist Nod harvesting vehicles, and unless dealt with quickly, can creep further out and can damage vehicles. This type often has a beast at its center, which if attacked and destroyed will cause the weed-like Tiberium to disappear slowly over time. Speaking of Tiberium creatures, alongside your opponent's forces, many of the missions have Tiberium creatures which can spawn inside the more larger Tiberium fields and are hostile to both factions. Missions wise, you now have the option of taking on optional side missions that if completed make the larger ones much more easier, by causing things like reinforcements no longer being present or certain other types to not be there. The final big difference is that in the single player campaign with Nod in particular, the types of forces that you have at your disposal does vary quite a bit, with more human-like forces being available in some missions and more cybernetic forces being available in others. And those are the main key differences in gameplay this time around with Tiberium Sun. On the subject of multiplayer, Just as with the first game, this was a key feature of the game, with both LAN and internet-based multiplayer being available. This is a really damn fun game to play in multiplayer. I often remember playing the game at LAN parties and having heaps of fun there. On the issue of bugs and technical issues, oh my god does this game have issues. Just like June 2000, this game does not play nice with more modern versions of Windows at all, and will require some work to get it working in Windows 10 or later. I highly recommend use of what's called TS Fix or TS Client to get the game working, otherwise you're very likely to not be able to get this game to work at all. Even if you use either of those options, you may still experience crashes, so be warned of this going in if you plan on playing this game. Unlike the first game, it unfortunately, as of the time of this recording, does not have the remaster treatment. Hopefully someday we get a remaster of this and Red Alert 2, as that would be massively beneficial to both games, as they both suffer from the same issues. DLC and expansion wise, Tiberium Sun received one expansion by the name of Firestorm, which continued from the end of the GDI campaign, with a new enemy in the form of an artificial intelligence called Cabal, which seeks to eradicate all human life from the planet. This expansion included new campaigns for both GDI and NOD, and adds additional units to both factions. Quite a good length, with a solid amount of missions. Very good stuff overall. Beyond Firestorm, all other additional content for the game is on the fan-made side of things, with quite a few fan-made campaigns produced and still in development for the game. The best of which, in my opinion, was Twisted Insurrection, which I covered in episode 3 of JReviews DLC, so check that out, I recommend it. Really damn good stuff to be found there. And that's about it for Tiberium Sun. Overall, it's a very good game and adds a whole heap of cool features to the core gameplay experience, though not as good as the first game, and certainly far more of a pain to get working on more modern systems. Fingers crossed on a remaster someday for it. I really hope that they make one for that one someday. And now on to the third game. Command & Conquer 3 Tiberium Wars was released in March of 2007 and was another success, though of a lower scale at 1 million in sales. It was the first in the main series to not be developed by Westwood Studios, as they had been fully absorbed and closed by EA by that point in time. The story to the game takes place some 17 years after the events of the second game's expansion Firestorm, with Tiberium having grown to such a scale on the planet that Earth's zones have been divided up into zones based on their livability status. GDI by this point has nearing completion of technology it hopes will help eradicate the substance from the planet entirely. All the while, Nod arises from the ashes to again threaten GDI in war for the planet. However, all is not as it seems, with a new alien faction known as the Skrin drawn to the planet, with plans to terraform the planet into a far more hospitable place for their race. Gameplay wise, it's very similar in style to the first two games, though much more towards the second. Completely gone is the June 2000 style influences of the second game, with a far more realistic style and look to everything. You even get glimpses of television shows of the time period, a definite improvement over the second game in that regard. Graphics this time round are in true 3D, no 2D sprites to be seen. In a few seconds, you can see through and through the massive bump up in graphics quality for this one. From the look of the terrain, units on screen, and the special effects, really good stuff. The Skrin in particular look quite impressive. FMVs return again and very well done in this game. Gone is the B-grade style and replaced with far better acting and a far more serious tone overall to it all. Once more, they went with an all-star cast for its time, with familiar faces like Michael Ironside, Billy D. Williams, as well as a few faces from Battlestar Galactica, with Trisha Helfer and Grace Park. Good performances all round by all of them. Music-wise, this was the first entry to not have involvement by Frank Klepecki, and it really shows, with far more of a background ambient style to it all. More music that is in the background that you don't pay attention to. It's nothing bad or anything, just not memorable, or tunes that you'd be likely to listen to in a playlist outside of the game. Far less pumping and warlike. Gameplay-wise, this one is super similar to the second game, as I said, with all of the new things added in that one being present here. The changes with this entry are in a revamped user interface, with each category of unit and building types being under specific tabs of the interface. And you now have multiples of each one based on how many of the associated building type that you have. So say you had 2 construction yards or unit producing buildings, then you'll have that many queues to choose from. It does max out once you have a few present though. On the subject of construction buildings, you now can build crane structures which act as a second building support crew, and are far cheaper to make than making a new construction vehicle, though it is limited to being placed within your buildable area, unlike the vehicles where you can just drive and start a new base wherever you like. You now can capture Tiberium spikes on some of the missions, which once captured provide a constant trickle of income. These are super handy to have under your control, as it means that you'll never run out of resources. The biggest gameplay change is obviously the addition of the new Screen faction, who come with a heap of very powerful units and new structure types. The GDI and NOD campaigns are quite lengthy, with 17 missions available for both, within which you have the optional side missions, as with Command & Conquer 2, returning if you're up for making the main missions easier. Scrin, on the other hand, has it super short, with only 4 missions total. That is one area of the game majorly lacking, and could have used far more on offer there. Unlike the earlier games, this one goes for a far more StarCraft-like approach with its campaigns, so it is recommended to play through GDI's campaign first, then NOD's second, as direct events from the GDI campaign are mentioned. After completing both GDI and NOD's campaigns, the Scrin campaign then becomes available. Difficulty level wise, just as in the prior games, I would put GDI's campaign as the easiest, NOD's being a definite bump up after that, with some very difficult missions at key points. And Scrin's being by far the most hard, with some very difficult first few missions. So the Scrin's in particular hits the ground running hard. Battles wise, things feel a lot faster in this entry, more in line with the first game, and less of the slowness of the second. Units wise, this one feels again more like the first, with GDI composed primarily of tank and fast moving jeep-like vehicles, and having its best units as the Mammoth tank. It does have some aircraft, though they're not as good in this game, meaning that you'll be mainly going with the vehicles. NOD, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixture, with some cybernetic units, standard attack tanks, stealth tanks, and their best unit being Avatar attack mechs, which can pick up parts from other units to add new abilities onto themselves. Aircraft-wise, NOD has it the best here, with access to the Venom ships which can be produced quickly, and once upgraded to laser weaponry, and can be really good at swarming targets of both the air and on the ground, though they don't last long on their own against enemies or defenses that can fire back. Scrin go totally for biological style technology in both their buildings and units that they can build. They have some of the deadliest infantry, and go for a more mechanized stuff with their vehicles, with their best being the Annihilator tripod, which can be quite difficult to take on. Their aircraft are also alright, with small fighter ships which can be good at picking away at targets, or to keep an area clear of stray infantry. Their best aircraft is the Planetary Assault Carrier, which can deal some decent damage. Multiplayer wise, just as with the other games, there is lots of fun to be found here, with various types on offer. I've not tried this game out in multiplayer myself, so can't speak much on it. On the side of bugs and technical issues, just as with the second game, this one was not built to work with Windows 10, but thankfully it takes far less tinkering to get it working. Just be sure to install DirectX 9 and you should be good to go. No mods or additional programs are needed to get this one working, thankfully. DLC and expansion wise, there was one expansion released for the game in the form of Kane's Wrath, though this time round it is a NOD exclusive campaign. It adds several units to all 3 factions, though nothing that I can recall that was super memorable. Missions wise, you get 13 new missions to play, so a good amount of content on the NOD side to be found here. If you're a fan of NOD like me, then this is a good one to check out, as it presents several key points from the main game, from new perspectives showing several things at play going on behind the scenes there. And that's about it for Command & Conquer 3. A really damn good game overall, with a great amount of overall content, a good story, and top-notch FMV sequences. Sadly though, this was the last of the traditional style games in the series, and this was the last one that was of a very high standard. And that takes us onto the final game in the series, and oh my god, it drops significantly with this one. Be warned. That final game was in the form of Command & Conquer 4 Tiberium Twilight. The game received a mixed reception by both fans of the franchise and by reviewers due to the vast changes to gameplay and a complete change of the user interface style. Completely gone is the interface style of games prior to a more center of the screen style and a change to having to pick which class you wanted to play as, which determined the buildings and units at your disposal. In addition, resource collection was no longer a major factor, and you now had a moving main vehicle which acted as your main base hub. I had my first and only play of this game roughly 10 years ago, and completely hated it. The gameplay present in this one is so different that I would not really call it a Command & Conquer game at all. It's more something else entirely and not at all positive. The story to the game takes place in 2062, some 15 years after the events of the third game. It sees GDI and Nod join together in an alliance after Kane strikes up a deal, claiming to offer a path to properly controlling Tiberium and turning it into a harmless secondary energy source. 15 years after that alliance was struck, groups of separatist rebels from both GDI and Nod begin to start attacks on the alliance in an attempt to eliminate Kane once and for all. Game feel wise, as previously mentioned, this game does not feel like the earlier games at all, and is more its own thing entirely. Resource collection is now completely gone, and it is now more about control of key nodes scattered around the map, and through that, currency is gained. In that respect, it more aligns with the first Dawn of War game, which worked off a similar gameplay mechanic. Graphics wise, this one is very similar to the third game, as it worked off a heavily modified version of the game engine used in that one, so I would put it on the same level as that game. The full motion video segments from what I've seen both in-game and from YouTube videos looks very nice. Very high quality stuff. Joe Khan again returned as Kane, but beyond that there was no memorable other actors present in the game to my knowledge. Music-wise, they completely changed the style of the music for this one, with far more of a classical style of music present. Again, more in line with Dawn of War on that front, nothing memorable at all to speak of. Gameplay-wise, I've already addressed all the main key differences, and I have nothing else to add really. Just a completely different style of game to all of the games that preceded it. To me, it's not Command & Conquer. Multiplayer was available for this game, but I never checked that out, so can't speak of it. It was present, however. On the bugs and technical issues side, damn! So the second game required quite some tinkering to get working, and the third game thankfully just needed DirectX 9 to work. Well, this one completely stopped working in more modern versions of Windows several years ago, and it was removed by all digital storefronts entirely by EA, which all in all is probably for the best, as this game is better left forgotten and never spoken of again. DLC and expansion wise, this was the first in the main series to not get any expansion or DLC for it at all. And that's about all I have to say on Command & Conquer 4. Largely a game that is forgettable and one that I've played once and I never plan to play again. Beyond the main series, there was also Red Alert, which is an excellent series of real-time strategy games in its own right, with lots of alternate history, time travel hijinks to be found. You also had Command & Conquer Generals, which was a single entry game that went for a more present-day setting, with both its time period and selection of factions to choose from. Another damn fine game to be found there. Be sure to check that out if you love RTS games. Next was Renegade, which was a first-person shooter set in the same gaming universe. I have not played that game myself, but have seen it played at LAN parties. It was apparently really fun to play in multiplayer, and got a fan mod in 2014 that allowed it to work on more modern systems, plus added a short single-player campaign to it. As I have not played that one personally, there is not much that I can say beyond that. Other than that, the only other Command & Conquer related games to come out in recent years has been crappy mobile games, which, like the fourth game, bear very little resemblance to the gameplay of the past games, and should be avoided entirely. I'll not waste any further words speaking on those games. And that's about it for both Command & Conquer 4 and the series as a whole. Overall, other than the 4th game, the Command & Conquer main series is fantastic stuff that is worthy of play at least a few times in your lifetime. Games 1 to 3 are all top-notch stuff and highly fun to play. If I was to rate the games from best to worst, I would order them as, starting with, the first game, for its establishment of the franchise, really damn interesting story, and cheesy but excellent FMVs and damn fun gameplay, and excellent music. Next up will be the third game, for excellent gameplay, top-notch FMVs, and a good amount of content. Then the second game, which loses some points due to being very difficult to get working properly in Windows, but does offer some really fun gameplay, and the nod side of things in particular is great on the FMV end. And then, finally with the fourth game, which is a complete abomination that should be burned from existence and then never spoken of again. And that's it for my review of the Command & Conquer main series. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos in the series, be sure to hit the subscribe button, and also just check out my channel for further videos and you'll find out what else is available. And with that, this is Iceman of JReviews signing out. Guys, have a good one!